Are we on? Are we on? Mike? Said it wasn't going on. Hello. Hello. Joyce is here.
Yes.
It says unsupported get request.
No, we are not on.
Yeah, but why is it?
I can see.
Oh, no, it says live right now.
Oh,
Family.
so it is, we are live.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, your family is here.
Yeah.
They're on. They're on with the people. I don't think they can see you from here.
Oh,
You have to come over here. You come closer
well, I'll
here.
come over here and say hello to my loving family. Here I am. Hello, family.
Hey, Joyce.
How are you?
Good, we're good.
Happy to see you all. Okay, now I'm getting back in my seat.
Well, so,
Give me a back-
but actually, oh, geez. I also want to, no, you're going back to your seat, but I want Joyce to say something. So last week, oh, wait, let me record. Let me record too. Last week, we finished with the demons. That was the last part we read about. We read about how to see them, right? Because they're everywhere. And it says right here, again, basically what we know about them is that they make us feel sick, right? They make us feel sick. But again, what we believe they're talking about is bacteria and viruses and things they couldn't see, but they knew made people sick. And they got sick, when they were around other people, and they got sick, when they saw someone was sick and then someone else got sick from that person or being around that person. So they couldn't explain it because they couldn't see it. And it says right here, part of the issue is you can't see these things. So we talked about it, and as I said, it's probably virus. So Joyce went home and she called me and she told me something I thought was interesting. I want her to share it with everybody.
Okay, I'm happy to share. What I'm good. Well, I was here at Torah class and I listened, and we talked about the demons maybe being tiny little viruses, germs, and bacteria. And I went to sleep last week and I woke up at 2:00 in the morning and I said, oh my God, I was dreaming about it. And what I dreamed was air and water. And I know all these years, people say, how do you stay so young? How do you stay so healthy? Most of the time, every once in a while, I get some bacteria, germs, or something. But I am in very good shape, basically.
I think that is true.
Eh,
Everyone would agree.
All right. Air and water. For 50 years, I have been drinking purified water. I checked with Marcy. She remembers back in Michigan when we lived there, we had big jugs of bottled water. And since I've been here in California, where I moved in 1977, I have air filters in every room in my house. I counted them. I have 7 air filters in my house now. But I have one upstairs that covers 3,000 square feet and one downstairs that supposedly covers 3,000 square feet. And I have an extra one in the kitchen, in the living room, in Lee's office, in my office, and in the master bedroom. I have air filters all over. So I'm breathing air that's purified, and I'm drinking water that goes through reverse osmosis. And I've been doing that for 50 years. And if people say, how are you staying so young? It dawned on me, it might be clean air and clean water. And now I'm going to give it back to the rabbi. Although if anybody asks any questions, I'll try to answer.
So, yeah, you don't drink, you said I drink purified vodka, 6 times filtered, by the way. At least one of them says 6 times filtered on it. I don't know what that means. But I told Joyce, I said, whatever she's doing, I'm getting that. So I'm getting the air filter. Seriously, I'm getting the air. I got an air filter after one of the fires and it was bad. You could smell the air was bad. So I got one, but I don't use it all the time. And it was like from Sears or whatever. But this one that she told me about It's like $700. It's a really good one. And
Well, it gets-
yeah, but if it's good for 30 years, so it looks like a really heavy duty one. And it's something to think about because whatever she's doing, it's definitely working. But I think that it makes sense. Your clean air.
Where's the filter go?
I have one this big, which does cover.
It's a machine.
It's on a shelf in my husband's office, and I have one downstairs on a shelf in the family room.
You can feel it in their house, in her house. It feels,
Because I was just talking to my mom about that, because we just put in air filters, but that was for the air conditioning.
yeah.
So
No,
the
no, no,
forced
no,
air
no. It's not the ones that go in the ceiling or.
Well, look, you're supposed to clean those. You're supposed to take those out every 3 months. A lot of people don't do that. By the way, if you look at your air conditioning filter, when you pull it out and you see how dirty it is, hello? And I change them regularly. I change them every 3 months. I have an alarm that goes off and I do it. When I see how much stuff is in there, I'm like, so getting an air filter is not a bad idea. I think it's definitely something to invest in. I was happy when Joyce told me, because I always talk about how amazing her health is, but I think you have to have a little genetic help. With all due respect, Joyce. I mean, you got good genes. Your mother made it to
95.
95. And you also take good care of yourself with what you eat
Absolutely.
in the way that you live.
But air and water.
Yeah, air and water are your basic elements. So if you take care of two of those elements, so I have water filters in the house. We have the one in the garage and we have one in the sink. We have the water softener and then also the filter. We have both. We got Rain. We've had that for years. But because the water out here is very hard water, bad water. But our stuff is good. And then we have another filter in the sink for the sink water. But I do think that there's something to be said for that because, look, that's killed people over the years. Bad water and, some city got infected. It's in the Talmud too, when people would drink bad water. So it's one of the reasons why you have to have fresh water when you do a mikvah or you do a bath. It has to be what we call mayim chayim, living water. Exactly. It has to be living water. And living water is water that circulates. It's water that comes. And they didn't know about bacteria. We know that. They didn't know about it. Couldn't see it, but they knew what happens when you drink bad water and when you're around water that's sitting. They knew it. So something to think about. And you'll see it here. You'll see the discussions in here about living water, about mayim chayim, and you'll understand now what they mean. Free flowing water. So that being said, that's kind of where we finished off. And thank you, Joyce, for giving us some more stuff to think about. And the guy that we kept reading about last week, who kept throwing out these little sayings, was this guy Abba Binyamin. So we read about him a couple of times. It talked about this guy. Back up here, another Abba Binyamin's things. So one of the things we're going to sometimes the rabbis in the Talmud, some guy will start bringing in teachings from that rabbi, and there'll just be a whole bunch of stuff. So these Berachot, as we call them, a Baraita is the singular, Berachot is the plural. These Berachot from Abba Binyamin, these are collections of sayings that were not necessarily they weren't in the Mishnah, but they were still collected. So even though there was stuff in the Mishnah that was very important, there was other important stuff that didn't make it into the Mishnah, but it sometimes found its way into the Talmud. The Talmud would quote a rabbi and say, he also taught this. And this is one of those sayings. And especially these kinds of sayings, a lot of them are the kinds of ones that we read in Pirkei Avot. They're sayings that people said, and in this case, here's a few that this same guy said. So Abba Binyamin also taught something about prayer. He said, one's prayer is only, fully heard is the kind of the extra part on it, but he literally said, one's prayer is only heard in a synagogue. As it is stated with regard to King Solomon's prayer in the temple, you have turned toward the prayer of your servant and to his supplication, Lord my God. And the quote, the line that he said, remember, the bold is what he actually said. The rest of it is added so we can understand what he said, because it's written in Talmudic shorthand. to listen to the song and the prayer which her servant prays before you on this day. The following verse concludes, to hear the prayer your servant directs towards this place. So that's in the next verse. We see that this one's prayer is heard specifically in the temple, of which the synagogue is a microcosm, right? It may be inferred that in a place of song, a synagogue is where God's prayers are sung, their prayer should be. Now, they basically taught, this one guy taught that the prayers were only heard in the temple. Okay, so we know that everyone used to pray, they were encouraged to pray at the temple in Jerusalem, the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. And that is from, again, the temple that Solomon built. So they throw out this line from Kings that the prayers were heard in this place. Now, you're going to ask, and of course we're going to discuss it, that's nuts. That's not the only place that prayers were offered in the Bible. So how can he say that? How can he make a statement that prayers can only be said in a synagogue? Well, and again, well, wait. So then he adds that because once the temple was destroyed, it went into the synagogue. That's the place where, because again, the synagogue became the microcosm or the replication of the temple, in capital T, the temple. By the way, you know, Reformed synagogues are the only places that used to call themselves temples. Conservative synagogue, I don't either. I don't use it. I say Beth Ami all the time. I don't say temple Beth. I don't love synagogue because it's a Greek word, but Beth Ami means already the house of my people. So if I say Beth Ami, but I say Beth Ami all the time. If you look at my posts, when I post on Facebook, I always say Beth. I don't post myself. I post the temple stuff. I do all the Beth Ami posts. So I always put Beth Ami. I very rarely I don't ever write temple Beth Ami. I sometimes write TBA and sometimes I write Beth Ami, but yeah, I don't like the word temple because there was only one temple. But in outside of LA in particular, temple was a clear indication that it was a Reformed synagogue. Not so much in LA. Because here in LA, we have Temple Aliyah in the Valley, which is conservative. We have Temple, Sinai Temple. Yeah, theirs is Temple Ramatzion. But Sinai Temple on Wilshire, Sinai Temple. No, it's conservative. No, oh yeah. So lots of places. Now, of course, Wilshire Boulevard Temple was the ultimate Reformed synagogue. But California didn't follow that tradition of only reserving temple, well, not only reserving, but only Reformed synagogues would call themselves temples. And to some extent, it was an audacious statement, right? So in like Atlanta, the big synagogue, and also, by the way, I learned it's also I think it's in Nashville, especially the Southern old Reformed synagogues, they were called the Temple. So the big one in Atlanta is still called the Temple. Even though there's lots of synagogues there, a Reformed, conservative, whatever, it's still the first Reformed, big Reformed traditional, it's not traditional necessarily Jewish, but traditional American Reformed synagogue is called just the Temple. So a lot of these Reformed synagogues, the grand Reformed synagogues were like that. Wilshire Boulevard Temple was built along those lines of being a grand temple. Yeah. I don't think so. People might call it that as a nickname, but it's not. It's called something. I can't remember the one in St. Thomas. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Of Reform Judaism? There was no divergence until Reform. So Reform was the first movement. No one ever called themselves conservative, Orthodox, whatever. Reform was the first movement, started in the late 1700s. Really beginning of 1800s, officially, when Napoleon kind of challenged Jews by saying, hey, we want you to be good citizens of our country. You don't have to be separate anymore. We don't want you to think like you got to be a Jew, like an autonomous, semi-autonomous group within our people. We want you to be a citizen. That was the first European country. The United States in the late 1700s had already started. Obviously, we were established as a country which was not a theocracy. So we never had that. So But in Europe and in other places where Judaism was larger, because remember in America, on the opening of the the Revolutionary War in this country, there were about 13,000 Jews in the whole country in 1776, in all of America. That was it. Civil War, by the Civil War, by the way, we had about 200, by the way, we had about 200,000 Jews on the opening day of the Civil War, about half and half in the North, half in the South. So Reform movement said, we got to figure out a way to be assimilated into the country so that we can be good American or good French people, good Germans, and good Jews at the same time. So the idea of like maintaining a foot in both identities was what how Reform Judaism developed. So that happened for about 100 years. There was really only Reform and then more traditional. And even within the Reform movement, it was still not like, well, there's Reform. It was really kind of like Enlightenment synagogues, or synagogues that were incorporating German, specifically German language. There were already Reformed synagogues a little bit in France, a little bit in Italy, but mainly in Germany. There were synagogues in the 1800s that started doing worship in German and doing things like having the rabbis dress like the Lutheran ministers. That started it to develop, but it wasn't really a movement until they had their own seminary, until they had their own places where they were educating these rabbis. Because the original Reform rabbis weren't even called Reform rabbis; they were just Enlightenment rabbis who were saying, "Hey, look, we want to do stuff in the native language in addition to we're going to have an organ in our synagogue." Which was a big deal because Jews were not necessarily supposed to play music on Shabbat. So that was kind of like, those were the first things. And then about 150 years later, conservative Judaism kind of said, hey, look, the Reform movement is too far assimilated. We need to kind of be somewhere between the more traditional Orthodox. So the Orthodox really didn't start identifying as Orthodox until there was a Reform movement to which to say, hey, we're not doing that. We're not having an organ. We're not having stuff in English or German or whatever. We're going to be all in Hebrew. We're going to do stuff exactly the way we've been doing it for thousands of years. But they were challenged to do that to some extent by the Reform movement. No one ever said, hey, we're Orthodox. No one ever used that term until the late 1800s. It was never used. No one said the word Orthodox. And then the last movement that kind of developed was conservative Judaism as a way to say, that's too far assimilated, and we need to do a little assimilating, but not that. That's too much. And so the Reform movement in the late, like we're talking 1885, after the Civil War in this country, that's where conservative Judaism started. And I would say to some extent, conservative Judaism is really and I'm going to say this, there are conservative synagogues outside of America, but 95% of conservative Jews are in this country. There is a conservative movement in Argentina. There's a conservative movement in Israel, small amount of conservative. There's a small amount of conservative synagogues in England, but for the most part, it's a uniquely American institution, conservative Judaism, because it really was an outgrowth of Jews in this country, especially our families. I'm talking about the Ashkenazi Jews that came here in the late 1800s and in the early 1900s who said, we're not going to a Reform synagogue where they speak in English all the time. And I will tell you, the other secret is the Reform Jews didn't want them there because they didn't want a bunch of Yiddish speaking people. So our grandparents who came here in the 1880s, early 1900s, 1920s, they weren't invited to the synagogues that had been here in the 1840s, the first Reform synagogues, 1820s, 1840s, like the ones that were established in New York or in Philadelphia or Savannah, where they already had Reform synagogues on the eve of the Civil War. The conservative Jews who came here in the late 1880s to 19, it's not a coincidence that the conservative movement started in the early 1900s. It was started by Eastern European Jews from Poland and Russia and Lithuania and Ukraine and all of our grandparents and great grandparents who came here and were not invited to come to the Reform Synagogue. And didn't really care about the fact that they weren't invited to the old club. They did their own. And those conservative synagogues, and by the way, the Reform leaders in New York paid for the seminary, what became the Jewish Theological Seminary, the conservative seminary for America. They paid for it. So if the Reform Jews of New York paid for it, it was because they specifically didn't want those people to come. Now, we like to say that they did it out of the goodness of their hearts, but it was almost as if they started a club for the people they didn't want in their club. And that's the part of this that we don't talk about. It's not talked about anymore. It's not like, it's almost like I have to explain that to people. They don't understand that the reason that their grandparents or parents went to a conservative synagogue was primarily because they didn't have the money and they didn't have the social status of the Jews who had been here all of 40 or 50 years before, by the way. I want to make a point. It wasn't like they were here for 200 years. Most of those Jews came in the 1840s. I'm serious. They weren't here for a long time, but they were here long enough to say, you don't want those Yiddish speakers to come. Yeah, this still is reconstruction. Yeah, that was really kind of started as an outgrowth of the conservative movement as well, by people who kind of liked what the Reform movement was doing, thought that the conservative movement should kind of modernize a little bit. And for the most part, it's just the same as the Reform and conservative movements. Eventually, they'll all be united. Joyce.
Another thought.
Yeah.
If there were so few Jews, how did we become a Judeo-Christian nation and so much of
We talked about it not on the Wednesday, but on the Tuesday, and when we read the prophets, the founding fathers of this country, and I mentioned when we read the prophet Micah, I talked about how George Washington quoted Micah in his letter to the first Jewish for one of the first communities in America, but one of the oldest synagogues, the one in Newport, Rhode Island. And he said to them, we want this country to be a country that people can live by those values that are primarily in the Old Testament, primarily in the Hebrew Bible, that talk about living life in peace, not necessarily in a completely new existence that we would call maybe post-apocalyptic, but that it goes back actually to the Torah's vision of what life is like, which is people farming, people living in peace, people taking care of their business and just being at peace. That's what our founding fathers imagined that this country could be.
Well, also because, well, I mean, George Washington, I want to say either, although he wasn't a founder, I was going to say Hamilton or Jefferson wrote.
Oh, he's a founding father. Alexander Hamilton, you can include him as a founding father. All right.
Wrote a thing saying like the Hebrews did the most to civilize man because we wrote.
It was Alexander Hamilton who actually said that.
Yeah, because he said it was the Hebrews who did the most to civilize man, because there's a reason we don't follow Greek rules. Theirs weren't that effective, but also because if you look at the basis for the technical structure of ancient Hebrew government, it was the people are already seen as valuable, the peasants are seen as valuable because God created them and technically chose them because they were the Hebrews. But then it was later the king's job to ensure that people were going on the right path. It wasn't, you owe your life to the king, which was most medieval European style.
But they also put up later the Ten Commandments.
Yeah,
and
but
stuff.
that's all based on, again, I would say, Joyce, the reality of this country is it's actually established by Christians in a Judeo-Roman, not a Judeo-Christian, but a Judeo-Roman style, a fusion of Jewish and Roman values, which is why.
I know a lot of people bring that up sometimes because I think technically most of the founders were Masonics.
Yeah, that's part of it. That's part of it. But look, I mean, you go to Washington, D.C., that's a Roman fantasy. That's a Roman fantasy. How do you not argue? I mean, I know it's also laid out along Masonic lines and everything like that. It's not irrelevant because the reality is what you see is a Roman fantasy.
I just know, because I know some Christian friends of mine, like, sometimes take it with a grain of salt about the founding of America, because they're like, oh, well, they're Masonic, they're Masons, they're not.
That's, I know, and that's not true. I mean, it is true that they were all Masonic, but those values are third after Jewish, Roman, and again, to some extent, Christian. But we talked about it yesterday, folks. The ideas that are purely Christian, and they're not purely Christian from the standpoint of, we know now from the Dead Sea Scrolls that they were based on Jewish thoughts of the time. They're revolutionary, folks. When we shared yesterday that when Jesus says you're going to have your families turn on you and you're going to turn off, that is not George Washington's quote of Micah that every man's going to live under his tree and his family, he's going to take care of his family and everything's going to be peaceful. Jesus is talking about a revolution. That's why the people that grew out of the 60s that created the Jesus people movements were correct. I'm not saying that was a good application. Jonestown was not a good application of Christian values, but was it an application of? Absolutely. And it was also, again, I don't blame Christianity for that. I blame revolutionary Judaism that was responsible for maybe us losing our homeland, just so you know. How do I know? I don't know for sure. But I do know that the Jews who pressed the Romans to basically say, go ahead, destroy our temple, were lunatics. In my book, by their own admission, when they blew up and literally blew up the temple on Tisha B'Av, they made the Romans do that. So you tell me, I mean, these were people that other Jews were afraid of. I told you before, when Yochanan ben Zakkai is snuck out of Jerusalem, he's worried about other Jews killing him for fleeing the town. To me, that's a mentality of crazy people who will blow up anything. And those were Jews. Those were Jews, and they were living at the same time that Christians are talking about the whole thing getting blown up too. I think Christians were probably less violent than some of the Jews at that time. So like I said, I don't say that Christianity invented this. I don't think Christianity, did something wrong from the standpoint of picking up on that, but they didn't want the Romans there. The Christians and Jews both thought that the Romans were evil, and I'm not saying they weren't, but our take on it, the rabbis' take on it, was you figure out how to survive this, how to live through it, and think we'll get through this. But
But the argument there is that at that time, right, Christianity was very young, right? Judaism has been fighting for survival for 1,000 years. And so to say that one was more aggressive than the other, well, it might have been true, but it was a very young, it had just been really established. And so, it makes sense that you've got a bunch of people that are being conquered constantly. They're aggressive, trying to fight for survival.
But the reason why there's no more zealots, why the zealots all died, was because they all killed themselves or killed Romans. They killed themselves at Masada. The last zealots killed themselves. The Christians did something brilliant to some extent, so they got out of Israel. They didn't get out. The ones who were there got killed like every other Jew, the early Jewish Christians, but the other ones that were living in Antioch or living in Philadelphia or the cities, the first churches in Turkey and Asia Minor, they survived. Ephesus, those places survived because they weren't in Israel. That's how the church survived. The church survived by getting out of the land. And eventually they could come back. They came back. But Judaism survived because we said, we're not going to fight the Romans. Our form of Judaism was the form that said, we're not fighting the Romans physically. We'll fight them spiritually, but we're not going to kill ourselves fighting them. So it was a survival mode. And we're only here because of these people. So it's a great discussion. We talked about the beginnings of Reform Judaism, and then we went all the way back to 2,000 years ago to the bigger split within Judaism, which was, and by the way, what that discussion shows you is there's always been many forms of Judaism. The fact that I will put forward that the friction that we have in this world today between Orthodox and Reform conservative Jews, is much less violent and much less diverse, or the spectrum is closer than it was 2,000 years ago when Jews were killing other Jews over this idea of, do we fight the Romans or we not fight the Romans? So, do we only live because we have a temple, or can we figure out a way to live outside of the temple? Which is the Sadducees, right? The Sadducees says we can't live as Jews if we don't have the temple. And the rabbis said, the Pharisees said, of course we can. Of course we can survive without the temple. So,
That's where the rabbis came.
yeah. So this idea is how we survived.
That post-Roman?
No, it's happening during that time. Happened a little bit before, and then that's where we survived. The Pharisees, that's why I would, if I could ever go back in time, it would be to that time. But our little part of the world put everything, that's why if I could go back to any time, it'd be 2,000 years ago, during around the time of Jesus, maybe a little bit before, a little bit after, during that time to see what was actually happening. Well, I think I can get it. I read all the sources, but to actually see it would be pretty wild. To actually see and to know in the back of my mind that what they're doing right now, this little backwater part of the Roman Empire, is going to change the whole world. The whole world. It's literally like somebody would say, what goes on? I apologize to anyone who's watching this in Palmdale and Mojave right now, but it would literally be if somebody said, what's going on out there right now is going to change the world. Because no one would know. No one would imagine it. So that's our story. So let's get back to what they said. Okay, there you go.
I was gonna
There you
ask
go.
another
But
question.
they were Sephardic Jews, those guys, originally. Yeah, Sephardic. Yes.
About the idea of having the temple and the single
Mm-hmm.
synagogue, so then ideally, you're not supposed to have multiple temples, you just have the one, and then everyone
Yeah.
travels to there.
Yeah. So every synagogue, though, as long as you don't listen.
But the Jewish towns in ancient Israel had like a yeshiva or a house equivalent, right, to like read Torah and write and study.
Yes, there were synagogues at the time of the temple.
But they were.
There was a synagogue. Yeah. There's a synagogue. There's a synagogue up at Masada.
I was gonna say, that area.
But that's what I'm
And
saying.
you know where? You know what they are? They're. You know how we know that they were there during the temple? Well, first of all, we know from the archaeology. We find coins from there, but they're all facing towards Jerusalem. So the ones in the north face south. The ones that are west of Jerusalem face towards the east. So wherever the synagogues were in Israel, they still face towards Jerusalem.
But then, that's what I'm saying though, is, so that means, so then what did those ancient Hebrews do on Shabbat? Because we go to.
What did the ancient, you're talking about during the time of the temple?
Well, yeah, because if they only have the one temple, they can't all walk all the way down to Jerusalem.
So they had prayers. They were doing Shabbat things before.
Yeah, but where? Though? 'Cause it's not, they don't have a temple to go to like we do.
They had a synagogue.
were
They
just-
prayed in that synagogue. So he's talking about right here. What are the
but you're
prayers
saying
that,
They're supposed to be just one though.
well, he said there's only, so Abba Binyamin said it when there was a temple. But you're going to see, they're going to shoot that down. Because already they've said, yeah, but every synagogue is a microcosm, call it a mikdash me'at. It's a small version of that, which by the way, the rabbis also said every one of our homes is a microcosm of the temple. That the Shabbat table that we create in our house is actually like the table of the priests. No, but we have a tradition. We don't do it, but some people do it. When they do challah, right? They put their challah, they put a little salt on it. Yeah. They cut off they rip their challah and then they dip it in salt. Why? Because that's what we did with the sacrifices.
When did the rabbis come?
2,100 years, a little bit before the temple. So the rabbis and the sacrifices overlapped, sure. So they were already teaching this stuff. Look, if they could have never come up with, the transition never would have happened unless it existed before, right? So once the temple was done, once it was taken down, the system was already functioning, which means all it was left was that system, right? So, which also teaches you a very important lesson, by the way, that if you have your life built around something and it gets taken away, it's really good if you have a solution already in the background to go in case that thing gets taken down. If all your eggs are in one basket, it's not good. That's a real big lesson from Jewish history, by the way. I think it's one of the most important lessons, which is never put all your eggs in one basket. Never say that if this gets taken away, everything's over. Can't do that. You always have to have a backup plan going in the background, just in case. It doesn't mean that it just doesn't mean that you have to, be psychotic or, always think that something's going to get lost. But if you have a system in place already, right? If it gets taken, the thing that you're relying on gets taken away, you don't go nuts. You have a backup plan. I tell people all the time, always have a backup plan, right? Never have your job shouldn't be the only thing that defines you, right? A person should not be, an external person shouldn't be the only thing that defines you, right, Joyce?
Absolutely.
Because if something happens to that person, you're not going to live anymore?
Where is it?
No. I don't know if everyone heard that, but John just said that glory is coming with him. You don't have any, you don't have any antifreeze around your house, do you? So again, back to what they're saying, we're gonna have this discussion about only prayers can get heard in the synagogue. So how did this guy even say this? So the rabbis are going to try to explain it away, if you will. Maybe they're going to teach us along the way. In explaining Abba Binyamin's statement, Ravin Bar Rav Ada said that Rabbi Yitzhak said. So he's quoting two people.
Hearsay.
Yeah. From where is it derived, the Holy One, blessed be he, is located in a synagogue, right? Which again, the word that they use for this is Beit Knesset. That's the word we use in Hebrew for the place of assembly, right? It's one of the words we use for synagogue. Right. So synagogue is the Greek word that conveys that, but that's not the only word we use for synagogue. We call it a Beit Midrash. We call it a house of study. So sometimes you'll see that used. But here, they're definitely talking about the rabbis, not the house of study. They're talking about the place where people would get together to pray. So this is a place of assembly, and it's not the temple. It's not the temple. So how do we know that God is in the synagogue? And the line that they quote is coming from Psalms, which we're about to read, but we're not going to get to this psalm in a long time. Psalm 82. God stands in the congregation of God, which by itself, by the way, is a weird line that we'll get to when we get to Psalm 82. I'm not going to discuss it now. Psalm 82, line 1, is one of the strangest lines in the Bible. And I will not go there right now. We'll get sucked down a rabbit hole. But Psalm 82, the lesson is that when God stands in the congregation, it means that God's in a congregation. Okay, the congregation of God is the place where people congregate to sing God's praises, and God is located amongst his congregation, which is anywhere where we gather together, right? And we're going to get to that. And from where is it derived that 10 people who pray, the divine presence is with them? And this is kind of a discussion we saw in Pirkei Avot too. As it is stated, God stands in the congregation of God, and the minimum number, that's the same line, God, and the minimum number of people that can constitute a congregation is a quorum of 10. Yes. So this is where, yes, and
22,000 years ago, this is one of the.
yes, where it's at least articulated. Well, wait a second. So they're going to say 10 is the quorum, is the minimal amount of people we have, right? But wait, we're not there yet, because they're going to say, well, wait a second. From where is it derived that 3 who sit in judgment, the divine presence is with them? It is derived, which, by the way, that says in judgment. It doesn't say, in prayer, but it says in judgment. It says, "B'kerev Elohim yishpot." It says, as it is stated, in the midst of the judges, he judges. And the minimum number of judges that comprises a court is 3. So if you have three people, it's a beit din. So they said, when it says that God judges, well, if God is in the judgment or in that situation, it means God is present if there's a beit din, if there's only three people. So they're saying, based on the quorum that you need for a court, if God is with the court, then he's with three people. Where is it derived that two people who engage in Torah study, the divine presence is with them? As it is stated, then they that feared the Lord spoke one with the other, and the Lord listened and heard. And a book of remembrance was written before him for them that fear the Lord and think upon his name. Look where that's from, my friends. We just read it yesterday. You just read it. This is a time where the Talmud and the Torah, for those who are here on Tuesdays, come together. They that feared the Lord spoke with the other. Well, speaking with the other only means there's two people, one speaking to the other. And the Lord listened. What? Okay, but it means that God is there.
Yeah.
So let's look at the actual line, right? The line from Malachi, which it's not opening right now. Why is it not opening? What does it say here? I have to make a donation?
The authors of this, rabbis,
Yeah.
whoever was writing it back then that actually got it to paper,
Yeah.
they could have been sitting around a table having wine and decided it was,
Yeah, but you have to quote the sources. You have to have a source. You can't just make it up. No, they're quoting the Bible. Got to quote the Bible. So these people are quoting and resting this on biblical text. Yes, but he's from the Bible. It doesn't have to be from the Torah, though most of the time when it comes to like, how do we fulfill the commandment, they would say, no, the first 5 books, from Genesis to Deuteronomy, really from Exodus to Deuteronomy is where we derive the mitzvot. But this isn't a mitzvah. Right? This is not, they're not deriving a mitzvah. They're coming up with a lesson. They're coming up with a text that they can explain something to, which right here is, but where is God? So again, this is the line we read yesterday, right? God has heard it and noted it, right? Those who revere God have been talking to one another. God has heard it and noted it. So here, it doesn't really say it's 2 people, but they said one person talking to another is only 2. So from there, we learn that God is with 2 people who are talking, at least if they're talking about something holy. So that's interesting. Use that as quote. Now we're going to push it. With regards to this verse, the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the phrase, and that think upon his name? Rav Ashi said, if a person intended to perform a mitzvah, but due to circumstances beyond his control, he did not perform it, the verse ascribes him the credit as if he performed the mitzvah, as he is among those that think about it. Now that's a weird line that isn't really about how many numbers there are, but this is an interesting line that they derive from this line from this same text, when they think upon his name. So this is an interesting, I would say it like it's a tangential line, but it's an interesting one, which says that if you intend to do a mitzvah and can't get around to doing it, and we're going to get a caveat on this. I know everyone's going to say, but what about, if he intended to do it and then can't do it because of things, and it says right here, this is not a commentary, beyond his control, it's as if he did it. So if you wanted to eat matzah at Passover, but you have no way of getting to your matzah, you just are in a place where there's no matzah.
Rabbi, go somewhere.
There's no matzah. But God would know my intention. What?
or you want to eat something you're not supposed to, you really have no self-control. It's beyond my control.
I don't think that's what they're talking about. It says beyond his control. Actually, I will tell you the actual, let me see what it says. Let me see what the actual Hebrews are. Me'aleh alav kind of is outside of him, I would say. I guess you could say. They're not saying that. Come on, John. They're saying it was, and again, beyond control. It means like something outside, external force stopped it. Because acted on him. Yeah. Well, you can't do it with the intention of not doing it in the first place. We're going to get to that. It says that. So, but they're going to get back to this. This isn't the numbers. They're going to get back to that statement, by the way, because they can't just throw that out there without talking about it. The Gemara returns to the original statement, from where it is derived that even one who sits and engages in Torah, right? The divine presence is with him. As it is stated, in every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. And that is from Exodus, right after the 10 Commandments. Exodus chapter 20, literally right there, it says that. So just so you know, right? Right here,
So we're,
right after they get the 10 Commandments, right? You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall blah, blah, blah. Right there. No coveting. That's the last commandment. And all the people witnessed it. We talked about it. They fell on their face. You speak to us, Moses. We don't want to hear anything more, right? And then this line right here, just after that. In every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. Wow.
One person should not be reading Torah.
Well, they're going to talk about what you can do in those situations, right? We're going to get to that today. When you have those discussions about minions and why they get very strict about that. But interestingly, right here, that's different from, does God hear your prayer when you're by yourself? And the answer is yes, because the divine presence is with you. And again, it is the Shekinah. The Shekinah is with you.
But that's different than reading Torah, studying Torah.
Well, it says Osek b'Torah. But again, they're clearly talking about this within the context of prayer or study or judgment or doing holy things. God's with you even when you're by yourself.
the next sentence says,
We have a statement here. Gemara asks, since the divine presence rests even upon one person who engages in Torah study, was it necessary to say the divine presence rests upon two? The Gemara answers, there is a difference between them. Two people, their words of Torah are written in the book of remembrance, as it is stated in a book of remembrance was written. However, a single individual's words of Torah are not written in a book of remembrance. Now that's interesting because they're saying, well, the one person, it's just not written in the book of remembrance. God doesn't remember it. So what is the effect of that? Well, it's a little bit better if you have two people because there's a legacy to it, which makes sense, right? Because two people discussed it. There's different opinions. We're going to record the difference of opinions. But then, of course, well, if two are better, what Gemara says the divine presence rests upon two and engaged in story. Is it necessary to mention three? So they start working backwards. So if two is mentioned, then why didn't they just say one? And so they said, no, two is there because of that. Now they say, well, what about three? Why is it three? And there it says, the Gemara answers, here too is a special verse, is necessary lest you say that judgment is merely to keep this peace among the citizenry, and the divine presence does not come and rest upon those who sit in judgment, as they're not engaged in Torah study. Ravin Bar Rav Ada teaches us that sitting in judgment is also Torah. And what he just laid out is that the judging, which requires a Beit Din, a minimum of 3 people have to be there to do a judgment. To do a Beit Din, you have to have 3 people. That is there because if you thought that that's not a holy action, it is. It's like study. It is Torah. So when you're making a judgment, it's the same as if you're praying. It's the same as if you're studying. The divine presence is there. And those 3 people are doing a holy thing, which you could say again, on the face of it, is it really holy? Yes, it's holy. So they are saying, well, we introduced it and now we're going to explain to you why we told you the 3. Oh, okay. So if it's 3, then why is it 10? Right? Since divine presence even rests on 3, why do we say 10? And here we get to what a minion is. Here we get to what makes 10 people special. The divine presence arrives before a group of 10, as the verse it says, right? God stands in the congregation of God. That indicates that when 10 individuals who comprise a congregation arrive, The divine presence is already there. For a group of three judges, however, the divine presence does not arrive until they sit and begin their deliberations, as in the midst of the judges, he judges. God aids in them in judgment, but he doesn't arrive before them. So, what?
You're saying individuals, not saying 10.
A group of 10, let me just see. Yeah, they didn't say 10.
No, they said individual.
Yeah, they didn't, it doesn't say men.
But women didn't study law then.
I'm just saying, it doesn't say it. It doesn't say it.
Does not say
So they were progressive back then.
Don't think they were, but they, I mean, it does say it. I would say it does say it. It doesn't, that's why they said individuals, because it doesn't say that. But we know that but they're opening this up to something very important, which is that 10 means that God is there waiting for them to get there. So God is really, really excited about 10 people. Yeah. Well, he's the first. You're the 11th. If you're the last.
Do our people online count? So
Yeah.
That's
That's a new discussion. That's the new halakha. You think, by the way, I'm joking about that. Conservative synagogue that I know of didn't have a minyan. Well, I know this because when I was in Arizona a couple weeks ago, they asked me to go to the minyan, and I had like stuff to do, and I felt bad that I couldn't go, because I would have gone if I could have, and they didn't have a minyan. So somebody who was there said to me, "You would have made the minyan." I said, "Really? You had 9 people?" They said, "No." I said, "You sure you had less than 9?" They said, "Yeah, we had like 6 or 7. So I said, "I wouldn't have made the minyan. You made me feel bad, and now it's not like if I had been there." So I said, "Well, how do they do the prayers then?" They said they had a lot of people, not a lot of people, but they had a half a dozen people online. They counted the people that were online.
I remember.
Listen to that. It's a pretty progressive.
We have like 5 of us.
I know, they would do that.
Yeah.
But isn't that interesting that they took the online people and counted them? Why not?
What did that?
No. Well, they wouldn't have done it, but I mean, the alternative is you don't get to pray that day. By the way, I would have really felt bad because it was a bat mitzvah, or bar bat mitzvah, it was a bat mitzvah minyan. So they couldn't get a minyan with the bat mitzvah girl's family. This is a large conservative synagogue. By the way, there might be people listening here, so I don't want to say it. But the point is that it's a big deal. And if you can count the people that are on virtually, then you can get your minyan. But I want to tell you something. So this seems really good that God is there for you if you're needing to make a minyan. Or no, if you make your minyan, if it's going to be a minyan, that God is waiting there for you. God's there already. But wait, I'm going to tell you something. But there's a corollary to that, which we're about to read. Which is, if God is coming to the minyan, if God's at the minyan, you better show up.
But he's the last one.
No, he's the first one.
Does not. God
Says
will
that.
come in their judgment, but does not
No.
arrive before.
It says right here. It's for the 3. He says right here, that's the difference with the 3. The 3, there's only 3 for the judge, for the judgment. It's almost like conditional that if the judges don't do it. I'm just going to tell you though, you think God being there waiting there for you is a good thing. And of course it's a good thing. It means that like God is excited about our prayers. You don't show up, God's not happy. God's expecting you to be there. You don't want to stand up God. I don't normally go there. It did.
You were asked.
Yeah, I know, but I wasn't expected.
God's happy tonight.
Yeah,
Lively debate.
we have a minyan.
Discussion.
You have a minyan with the people online. We definitely do. Anyways, we're well over the minyan with the people online. But yeah, we're gonna get to the part about standing God up. But yeah, so that's what's different. So yeah, God is with us even when we're praying by ourselves. But the more people we have, that when we get to that minyan, then we have something special because God is it's not conditional. It's not like God's just hovering. God's there. I hope God's going to be happy. I hope we're singing and making God happy. So now I'm only reminding you of this because we're about to go on a different, on a tangent. Because now we get, well, Rabbi Avin, now we're going to get another quote from him. But I promise you, we're going to get back to this issue about leaving God holding the bag at your minyan. If you regularly go to the minyan, which by the way, I mean, like, you can understand why people go to the minyan and then when they take it really seriously, they don't ever want to miss the minyan. You'll see.
Did you just study Torah?
What, the minyan? No, it's praying.
Is it
It's less
praying
studying Torah.
when you read, or is it saying the prayer?
It's saying the prayers. It's saying the prayers.
Prayer?
No, no, it's the whole morning service.
Flag, that is required.
No. But there's an understanding that if you gather 10 people together, but look you'll see, we'll get to what like I said, what the responsibility is on that. But here's a really beautiful tangent, if you will, because we're talking about God being in our prayer group. It's an interesting idea because now we're going to get into what does God actually do? Or how does God actually pray? The rabbis are going to throw this out. And again, I remember the first time I read this, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing that people actually said this or dreamt it. The Gemara talks about, again, I was going to quote Rabbi Avin bar Rav Ada. He said that Rabbi Yitzhak said, from where is it derived that the Holy One, blessed be he, wears phylacteries? A fancy word for tefillin. How do we know that he wears tefillin? And there's a line in the prophet Isaiah, who we've also read, that says, the Lord has sworn on his right hand by the arm of his strength. Again, I know that's a little bit forward for the right-handed people, but when we think about the fact that God has a right hand, his right hand, we have the phylacteries, the tefillin. So here's the tefillin for the arm. And there's the one for the head, for those who are, let me just
That's my dad.
stop this share right now. Well, these are the head ones and these are the arm ones. So we have the tefillin, which during the time of the rabbis, and by the way, during the time of Jesus, were worn by most Jewish people for prayer. Though, at least according to Jesus and according to the Talmud too, there's some people that are wearing them all the time. And Jesus actually kind of makes fun of the Pharisees who are wearing their stuff all the time, walking around with their taluses out and their tefillin on all the time. But it works because we know that there were people who thought that maybe we're supposed to keep this on all the time. But here's another thing that we don't get in the Christian scripture, but we get it at the same time the Christians are talking, or some Christians are talking about, and by the way, they didn't tell people not to wear it. The early Christians probably did wear tefillin, but they said, we're going to get to that. And there's one on your arm, which again, if you're right-handed, you put on your right arm. If you're left-handed, you put on your arm of strength. So there are left-handed tefillin. God has tefillin. God has tefillin. Since it's right-handed, since it's customary to swear upon holy objects, it is understood that his right hand and right arm of his strength are the holy objects which God wore.
That's it.
Specific. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's very interesting.
So that, who identified that?
This tradition, specifically his right hand refers to the Torah. Okay, so they're saying, well, right hand, is that tefillin? Is it stated in describing the Torah, from his right hand a fiery law for his people? That's what it says in Deuteronomy about the Torah. To his arm of strength, his left hand refers to the phylacteries, as is stated, that God gave strength to his nation in the form of the mitzvah of phylacteries. So maybe God has Torah and tefillin. And the Gemara asks, from where is it derived that the phylacteries provide strength for Israel? as it is written, and all the nations of the land shall see the name of the Lord is called upon you, and they will fear you. It was taught in a Baraita that Rabbi Eliezer the Great says, this is a reference to the phylacteries of the head upon which the name of God is written in the fulfillment of the verse that the Lord's name is upon you. So here's where it says God has tefillin on the head and on the arm. Lest you think God just has tefillin on his arm. Now, the tefillin, and I'll pass it around, the head tefillin, man, I can pass around both. I'll pass around both. The head tefillin, and the reason you can say that it's head tefillin is that it goes behind, and I want you to see them because we're going to have a discussion about it. For those who are watching online, I'm going to show them to you, and then I'm going to pass them around for the people here. There's the head tefillin is here, and you can see it goes on the head so that it's right here between your eyes. And there's a knot in the back. And I'll show the knot to everybody here. It's online. That's the knot in the back. And the reason that I'm saying that is because we're actually, oh, wait, I'm not showing. I need to show it up there. I'm showing it to the camera. I'm showing it to the camera on the computer, which is shut off. So this is the back strap, where the button where the straps on the back come. On the front of the head, you can see very clearly that there's 4 compartments in here. On the arm one, there's not. There's only 1 compartment. So there's 4 compartments here, and there's 1 compartment on the arm one, which we bind on our arm. So I'm going to pass these around. And I will also show something on the screen. I'm going to show you. I'm going to get to that.
I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna
go home and look at my.
I'm going to get to that. So traditionally, we wear tefillin every day except Shabbat. So I'm going to also, when I show you, I don't currently. I have in the past, and it's definitely a mitzvah that, some people take very seriously.
Louis had an ice cream
Uh-huh.
one day, and these 2 kids from Quebec came up, one to know, one like, Phil, and I said, how the hell do you know what to do?
Right.
Oh, sorry, where am I going to? Florida?
No, well, you can do it whenever you want, but the commandment to wear tefillin is mentioned right here. It shall be a sign upon your hand and a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth, for with a strong hand did the Lord bring you out of Egypt. And it shall be a sign upon your hand, again, and as totafot, as a sign between your eyes, however you translate totafot, for a mighty hand did the Lord bring us out from Egypt. And then it says in Deuteronomy, the famous line that's part of the Sheman Ve'afta, and you shall bind them as a sign upon your arm, and they shall be totafot, which is usually translated as 4 frontlets, between your eyes. And then it says also, and you shall put these words on your heart and on your soul, and you shall tie them for a sign upon your arm, and they shall be its totafot between your eyes. Now, nowhere in the Torah does it actually say that there are boxes that you put on yourself. But some people felt, again, the rabbis being those people, some of those people, that you also actually literally had to do that. So we don't know that there was, again, they did it during the biblical period, but we do know that by the time of the 1st century, many Jews understood these verses, thank you, literally, and wore physical tefillin, as shown by archaeological finds at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. We've also found those. And we also have this reference in Matthew 23, which talks about the Jews wearing tefillin. Karaite Judaism, which we again know is very literal Mike always loves talking about the Karaites. They understood it to be not literal. Yeah, they said, wait a second. Are you really have to understand this stuff literally? Can't it be symbolic? Can't it be figurative? Because we're already doing a little bit of this. I'm going to show you something right here
So what are the Karaites?
because we're just here. They just said it's a metaphor. You don't have to literally, same thing that we say, I say, which is, yeah, it's a very important tradition, but it's not necessarily a tradition that we have to take literally. But maybe some people do. It's an important tradition for me because Jews have done it for thousands of years. But do I believe that it was ever intended to be literally? I guess if I did, I'd have a hard time knowing when to take them off. Here's Matthew, by the way. I told you the Christian Bible said it. The teachers of the laws and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. So he calls out the Pharisees for being hypocrites, telling everybody else what to do, but they're not doing it themselves. Everything they do is for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide, which is these tefillin, and they make the tassels on their garments long. They're tefillin, right? They're tzitzit. They're talis. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others. So he's telling everybody, he's calling them out for their hypocrisy. By the way, the temple still exists at this point, folks. This is 30 years before the temple is destroyed. And the rabbis are already behaving, some of them are behaving badly. Guess what? There's still rabbis who do that. And then, of course, he says, but you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher and you are all brothers. And you do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one father and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So he's telling people, don't be a hypocrite. Yeah, isn't it interesting that, and by the way, when Christians read this throughout history, especially this one dude named Martin Luther, he said, the priests are doing exactly what Jesus called these people out for, doing stuff hypocritically.
But when they mentioned the Messiah.
Of course, because what is he doing? He's telling people what, by the way, the people at Qumran told their people too. That's why I said I don't blame Jesus for saying that, because there were other Jews that were saying the same thing, right? Which is, we're preparing for battle, and you better know that there's going to be some stuff coming down. Yeah. By the way, I want to show you one other line since we're already here. I love this line because people go, are you kidding me? This is historical fact, by the way. This is why it's very important to know what's in the Christian Bible. Right? He says that, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you're hypocrites. You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those who enter who are trying to. So he calls them out for telling people, you're not getting into heaven, and they're not getting into heaven. And look what he says next. Woe to you, teachers of the laws and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You travel over land and sea to win a single convert. And when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much of a child of hell as you are. Now, by the way, this is where people go, sounds a little anti-Semitic. But it is interesting that Matthew, who's a Jew, is telling us, even if Jesus didn't say this, he's telling us that there were people who made fun of the rabbis for converting people to Judaism. And they didn't just do it a little bit. They were going all over the world making converts. And he's calling them out on it. He's saying, these people are being led into the wrong kind of behavior. Now, it is a problem when you see these kind of quotes, because these are the kind of quotes that anti-Semitism was built on. Anti-Semitism was built on, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. This is not a friendly verse for Judaism. I want you to see it with your own eyes for a lot of reasons, not least of which is gosh, it tells us a little bit about how the early Christians, Jewish Christians, saw the rabbis, how they saw rabbinic Judaism. They saw it for some hypocrisy, which I think they must have 100% been accurate on. But I also think that they're making fun of the fact that Jews were aggressively looking to make converts, which is ironic because within a few years, they're doing the same thing. But it all, that's chapter 23. What is your translation in 15? What is, do you have a translation that, oh, it's okay. It's all right.
Mary, what is yours?
She doesn't bring on. She doesn't bring it. Oh, no, look, it's okay. I'll show you. That's the New International Version, which I like a lot. The NIV we call it, but I'll show you the King James. Yeah, well, I like the NIV. That's why I use it. That's why it's my default, but I'll show you the King James. I got no issue. I got it right here. It's a great thing about a computer, right? It says right here. Okay. It says right here. Ye make him twofold more the child of hell than yourselves. So it's pretty close. I'm gonna say there's not a real friendly version of that. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, I'll show you. Another good translation is the Revised Standard Version, right?
Right, especially since they started doing what, not to say that they were trying to make them children of hell, of course, but they started prophesying and converting themselves.
Yes, yes. The weird thing is they saw us as aggressive proselytizers. I believe that they were right. I know, but I believe that they were right in calling us out. I mean, it must have been true. I mean, I don't mind if we went back to aggressively winning converts over, but we're not going to do it. But it's ridiculous that that we would be called out by the people, like you said, who do it aggressively. But it tells us that we did it aggressively and they copied us. I just want you to know and see with your own eyes that that's what we did. So when we talk about Christians doing things and we go, well, I wish we didn't do it. Well, okay, well, we did. Don't be so sure that some of the things, like I said, that are very revolutionary and that I think are difficult verses, a lot of them are difficult because Jews were doing the same thing. Christianity didn't invent this stuff. They took stuff that was already flowing around in the Jewish world at that time. And I guarantee you there were other Jews out there besides Jesus who said the rabbis are hypocrites. They make tefillin and taluses to show people how religious they are. I think it's a fair thing. It's always a fair thing to call people out for what you see as hypocritical. So back to I want to show you one other thing. Back to the tefillin, just one thing real quick to show you what's in the tefillin. I want to show you, so yeah, we just got a little onto the Christian source. Showed you the sources on it, but let's just take a look real quickly. The boxes. So we have on both sides of the head tefillin the Hebrew shin, right? So on it is a shin, and the straps, right? It says when you wrap it around your arm, you wrap it around your arm and then you finish with it around your middle finger. Okay? Right? But let's look at what's actually inside of them. On the head, the 4 biblical passages which refer to the tefillin are written on scrolls and placed inside. Here's a guy, a scribe, He's got the little boxes there. Same guy that writes Torahs will also do tefillin.
Can you open it?
If I open it, I can't use it anymore. It's sewn. I'd have to get it fixed. You can get it sewn. If your tefillin is old, right, the back starts coming off and you can open it. It's sewn. It's made with parchment.
So when do I wear my dad? Fine.
Put it on you. Put it on when you get home. See if it feels special. Okay, well, okay, you can. But if you put it on, you never put it on. You never put it on? You can.
Go on YouTube, that's what I learned.
No, seriously, you gotta practice. You gotta practice it.
Because maybe you folks know it and people online, or maybe you don't.
No.
You don't want to ask it. I don't mind asking it. I can Wikipedia and YouTube it like all of us, but I'd rather
So,
discuss it.
yes, so we're gonna talk about that right now. So here's the scrolls. Scrolls are from sanctify to me, which is the beginning of Exodus. It's the whole line. When Adonai brings you, which is Exodus chapter 13, hear, O Israel, which is the Shema, right? And then if you observe my commandments, which is from Deuteronomy chapter 11. It says the Hebrew Ashuri script must be used, and there are main three styles used, which are it's basically saying here, this is I'll just show you. That's what the script looks like. There's different fonts. Okay. And then within those fonts, there's like sub fonts. So these are the fonts that the styles that you can use. Beis Yosef, Arizal, and Velish. These are ones that are used. And again, Ashkenazi Jews usually use those. Hasidic Jews use those. And Sephardic Jews use those. So it says the texts have to be written with halakhically acceptable ink, right? It's got to be written with a Torah ink, and it has to be written perfectly. There are 3,188 letters. What? And it can take as long. Correct. And it could take up to 15 hours to write a complete set.
Wow. There are a lot of the scribes that do this?
Yeah, the same scribes that do the Torah will also, all of them know how to do,
That
but that scroll costs a lot of money. Yeah,
on.
On Masada, there's a sofer. Yes. Yeah, he does those. Yeah. So, fill-in were worn all day, but not during the night. One of the reasons is again, because you can't see it. Can't see it, then. Observant Jews make tremendous effort to don tefillin at the appropriate time, even in crowded airports, even on the airplane. When whatever calendar they're following, whatever schedule they're following on that time. So if they're from New York and they're following New York time, the time that they are in New York, even if they're on the plane. If they're once they land, then they're following it from the local time. But when they're on the plane, they're following when they took off. But it's a good question because so here are the laws of it. Here's the full text of it. So there's, I said, Exodus chapter 13, 1, verse 1, and then Exodus chapter 13. Now, the lines from Deuteronomy, the 2 lines from Deuteronomy, and that's where you have them. Again, what are the lines? Primarily, the lines that talk about them. The lines that say, put them in as a memorial. Now, why are we doing this? Because I want to show you back to the Berachot, back to the section. Because now we just heard that God wears tefillin. So if God wears tefillin, what is in God's tefillin? Right? Rav Nachman bar Yitzhak said to Rav Chia bar Avin, what is written in the phylacteries of God? If God's wearing tefillin, what does he have in his tefillin? We know, I just showed you what we have. We have the lines that essentially say, put them on the sign in your. Now, again, we can understand this metaphorically. Doesn't mean you literally have to bind them as a sign, or put them here in your head. Think about them. Let them be on your head. Let them be in your actions, right? Let them guide your hand. But God, what's in God's? It is written, who is like your people, Israel, one nation in the land? That's a line from Chronicles, from the end of the Bible, towards the end of the whole Tanakh. God's phylacteries, God's tefillin, serve to connect him, in a sense, to the world, and the essence of which is Israel.
I always thought it was to get you closer.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is. It's to get, it's like a radio. It's like a radio that focuses God to your head, right? That's what some people look at it like a focus, way of focusing. So if God has that, what's he focusing? He's focusing on us. And just like we have a line about remembering God in the Torah, God remembers us. God's tefillin has us in it. Wow. God connects to us through his tefillin. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzhak continues, is the Holy One, blessed be he, glorified through the glory of Israel? Is that really true? Rav Chia Bar Avin answered, yes. As indicated by the juxtaposition of two verses, it is stated, you have affirmed this day that the Lord is your God, and that you will walk in his ways and keep his commandments. This is from Devarim, from Deuteronomy. And listen to his voice. To keep his laws and commandments, you will listen to his voice. And the subsequent verse states, and the Lord has affirmed this day that you are his treasure, as he spoke to you to keep his commandments. So those two verses next to each other, Deuteronomy chapter 17 and 18, from those two things next to each other, it is derived. From the juxtaposition, it is derived, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Israel, you have made me a single entity in the world, as you singled me out as a separate and unique. And because of this, I will make you a single entity in the world, and you will be treasured nation chosen by God. So this relationship between ourselves and God, I'll show you the line exactly from Deuteronomy. You have affirmed this day that Adonai is your God, right? That's what we just said. And Adonai has affirmed this day that you are, as promised, God's treasured people who will observe all the divine commandments. Now, this is from Deuteronomy chapter 26, the covenanting of us to God. When we are about to come into the land of Israel, in this portion, Kitavo, we read, you will observe the mitzvahs that God gives you, and God will treasure you in return. What is this? This is the contract. I will do this for you, and you will do this for me. This is an agreement. And so God remembers this. God remembers this. And this is where we get this idea of chosenness, right? This is where it comes from. It comes from the beginning of Genesis, when God says that to Abraham, right? But here it says that you will be a treasured people. This isn't for one person anymore. This is to Abraham's descendants. That's to you and I, to everybody here. This is God's treasured people. But it also means that you have to do the mitzvot. You will walk in God's ways. Alechet bidrachav. You are walking in God's ways and keeping the laws, guarding them, shmor, becoming guardian of these laws and mitzvot. And again, rules, if you will, mishpat. The mishpat. The Torah, you're keeping these laws. So this is an amazing idea. And so what God does is God puts on tefillin to remind him of that agreement. God remembers this relationship by having this unique relationship that God has with us. Right? You have made me a single entity in this world. What does this even mean? God just said that we made God an entity in this world. To some extent, God's presence in this world is on us. God doesn't exist if we don't exist. God says, when you say the Shema, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Because of this, I will make you a single entity in the world, unique and elevated with the utterance, who is like your people, Israel, one nation in the land. Consequently, the Holy One, blessed be he, is glorified through the glory of Israel, whose praises are written in God's tefillin. God remembers the relationship that he has with us. The tefillin that he wears reminds him of that. So listen to that, the audaciousness of that statement, that God remembers us through tefillin on his head. That's what the rabbis taught us. So when you understand that there are people who literally believe this, that literally believe that when we have to fill it on our head and God has to fill it on his head, that we're connected. That's why it's such an important mitzvah for some people, because we're not just doing it for ourselves. When we have that connection, like the tin cans that people would hold, where one person has the one side of the tin can and the other person has the other side, or the walkie-talkie that people used to use. But think about it. It's really the string, because, anybody could have a walkie-talkie. The string, each one of you had to have that can on the other side. Walkie-talkie can have 2 or 3 people have a walkie-talkie if they have the right frequency. This is a frequency between you and God when you have the tefillin on your head. Yeah, and literally, when you put that on your head, you're basically saying, I'm connected to God. Now, again, I think people forget that in the mix of the mitzvah of putting it on your head. The reason that Chabad guy ran up to you and did it is because he's being taught that he's doing a tremendous mitzvah by having you wear it, which is nice, because at least it's not, look at my tefillin. I'm putting it on you, which is nice because I'm trying to get someone else to wear tefillin. But this concept of just putting on you and then it's magic is kind of weird. Because if you don't really think about it, I don't know if anyone ever says this. I'm not saying that they don't. I'm not saying they don't. But if the guy who put it on you told you, I'm going to put this on you because God's on the other end of this can. He's not going to say that. He's too young. He wouldn't know. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when we were here on Tuesday, we had our,
Yeah.
and I wore it.
So, look,
I felt it. I
So-
felt that tin can.
so when people feel that they're connected, and what does that do to them? How do they feel that connection? What's interesting about it is that sometimes, I don't know, I can only tell you from my experience, because I've gone, over a year, sometimes, putting up tefillin every day. But I will tell you that at a certain point, it feels like a chore, and it doesn't feel like, in my mind, it felt like a chore. But there are times I put it on and I don't, it's like I said, I have them right there because sometimes I put it on. And I have one at home, and I have one in my car. I don't know. I have one in my car. I do. I have a little go bag, little go bag. So, if it's meaningful for me on that day to do it, then I'll do it.
Right.
But
You're thinking it's a sword, then
it's not. It's not. But it is an interesting thing to think about. I'll tell you my worst experience with that whole thing, and I've never seen it again, but I've actually told this story before. I will tell you, it's a wonderful thing that Chabad, goes around and has people put on tefillin. I think it's wonderful. But I had a horrible experience once. I was at the wall. I took a group of young kids from Sacramento. I was 25, a long time ago. Yeah, it was just before I got married, so it was a little over 30 years ago. And I took this group, my dad arranged it, and somehow he thought it'd be a good idea for me as a new rabbinic student. I wasn't even a rabbi yet, I was a rabbinic student, that I would have this experience of taking these kids to Israel. This was 7 years before birthright. It's a confirmation group from Sacramento. Nice kids. And they had saved up their money. It was a big Reform synagogue in Sacramento. They had saved up their money. They had done car washes and they had done all this stuff. And they raised the money to go to Israel. So we did. I took them around Israel for a month. And I drove, and I was the only person. I didn't have a co-leader. And I don't think I've ever said this part before. My dad gave me a chunk of money and he said, you make this money last. If there's any money left over, you can have it. But this is how much you're getting paid. So you budgeted it out. He did stuff like that, and so it seemed weird, but it was weird. It was weird. Because my dad had these arrangements with people around the country, and the kids got an amazing trip. And I'm not saying that because I took them. I'm telling you, It was amazing because it happened to be a Maccabea year. It was 93. So it was a Maccabea year. So they got to see the Maccabea games. They got to do a lot of cool things and took them from one end of the country to the other. And because my dad had a barter arrangement with the Tel Aviv Hilton, I had 15 kids staying at the Tel Aviv Hilton. 15-year-old kids. They weren't even college. This was before birthright. These were high school 15-year-olds. I mean, really young kids. I mean, not young. And they were actually pretty mature and pretty good kids. Geez, the kids are in their 40s now. So, so I took them and I took them around, and I remember I took them up to the Temple Mount back in 93. One of the last times I went on the Temple Mount. It's not the last time. So I took them around, and we were at the Temple Mount. We came down off the Temple Mount. We were at the wall, and some Chabad guys came up to the kids to ask them to put on tefillin. I said, "Oh, that's cool." So they started. They were like, well, you know, what should we do? I said, "Yeah, go put on tefillin." So one of the Chabad kids went over. You know, was probably 5 years older, maybe 3 years older than one of the kids in my group. He went over to him. I heard this. Went over to the kid and said, "Did you put on tefillin today?" And the kid was like, "No." And he thought it was going to be cool. And you know, there was a bunch of boys. I was with the boys because I was on the men's side. And the guy came over to him and started putting on the tefillin on him. And he said to the kid, he said, "Is your mom Jewish?" And the kid said, "No." And it was true because the kid, I remember the kid's name still, 30 years later, Noah. The kid said, "No, my mom's not Jewish. My dad is Jewish. My mom's not Jewish." He took the tefillin away from the kid. So I went up I saw this, and I saw it in like slow motion. I'm like, I saw the kid's face, like, and I went over to the Chabad kid and I said, "What you just did was a horrible sin. I know you were trying to do something good by having somebody wear tefillin, but what you just did by embarrassing that child is one of the worst sins you could do. Embarrassment is one of the worst things you could do. From now on, when you go around asking people if they want to wear tefillin, you ask them before you start putting it on whether they're Jewish or not in your mind." This kid saved up his money to come to Israel, and you just humiliated him here at the wall, at the holiest place in Judaism. You just humiliated him. So I tore into this kid. I don't know if he cared. I don't know if it ever sat with him. I don't know. But I've told that to a few Chabad people. I said, I hope you fix. I don't even know. I was 25. But I knew that, and I knew that at that time, maybe I had just learned, I don't know what I knew or what I didn't know, but I did know that there was a part of Judaism that can be a very hypocritical. And I went back to my knowledge of what, I'm not saying I said this at the time, but I thought about in the back of my mind, you know what? Jesus was right. There were hypocrites and there are hypocrites and there are hypocrites all over the place. And this dude was just an idiot right now, putting on the tefillin. Yeah. So I thought about that. And I thought about, look, when the Pharisees go off the rails, whether they're rabbis from 2,000 years ago or rabbis from today, they totally miss the point. And again, I think that Chabad has gotten a little bit better as they've gotten in the last 30 years, as they've gotten more exposed to interfaith families and other stuff, that they're not as stupid when it comes to that kind of stuff. But when I hear that, it just like I remember it as vividly today as it happened to me 30 years ago. I will never forget it until the day I die. It was one of the most embarrassing situations I've ever been in as a Jew. And yeah, it's just embarrassment. Embarrassing. Yeah.
I think he said you're Jewish, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how he said it.
Well, first of all, I've never heard anyone ever ask that question, was your mom Jewish? I never heard that since. But I can tell you this, putting tefillin on a Gentile doesn't render your tefillin unusable anymore. It's ridiculous. It's an absolutely ridiculous statement. You put them on somebody who is completely Gentile, it does not render them not usable anymore, and it's not a sin.
It's that like sort of seen as offensive though, if a
What?
Gentile were to wear it.
If a Gentile wore it to make fun of it, then yes. I've seen that, by the way, and it is offensive.
Or you know, that Donna video she did.
Yeah, with the tefillin.
It Cause she spent time at the Kabbalah Center.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if she, I don't know if she intended it to be offensive. I really don't. I'm not sure what her intention was, but it was not smart from the standpoint of, if you're gonna broadcast something, if you're gonna do something in public, you gotta think of the consequences of it. Look, I mean,
Well, cause the Orthodox got upset about it, cause they said it was offensive that a Gentile would wear the fillet.
I know what they said. I know that it was partly because of Madonna and because of other stuff that she had done before that. I mean, look, she had made a career before that of essentially being, of using sexualized imagery. And I mean, I don't know that everyone would have, I don't know if it would have made an issue. Also, she's super famous, or she was super famous when she did it. So I don't know. Look, I generally would say, well, it was artistic and it was her choice. I don't think she intended it to be offensive, but yeah, I get it. And she's always made this kind of weird, like, I do Kabbalah, but I'm not Jewish and whatever. I mean, she's the one who's done this stuff. So she's the one who's opened this up. So exactly. So if she's, so yeah, that's not my issue, because I can't speak on behalf of Christianity, but I would have been offended by some of the stuff she used where she used crosses and stuff. So yeah, I mean, that's part of the issue. And the rabbis who were offended by her, Jews that were offended by it because she's done stuff, and they know that. I mean, other people know that. So you don't have to be, completely involved in society to know that she's done that. Everyone knew her. She was super, super famous. Look, Leonard Nimoy did a whole photo shoot with tefillin and taluses. It was called Shekhinah, with women wearing tefillin and taluses, which was artistic, but somewhat crossed the line maybe for some people. But no one said anything about it because, number one, no one saw it. And even though Leonard Nimoy himself is famous, he's not really famous for being a photographer. So, I'm sure people who did see it, who were religious, thought it was somewhat offensive, if not very offensive. But here, I'll show you that. They don't have to, and they're not traditionally supposed to, but there is a tradition that women could wear it. And we actually read that some of the rabbis taught their own daughters to do it. Look, I'm going to just show you because I mentioned it. You can decide whether this is somewhat inappropriate or not. But these are Leonard Nimoy's, this was Leonard Nimoy's work. So this was a, I mean, that's yes, yes. So I'm just going to say that you never heard of that, right? Has anyone heard of that? It was 20 years ago. I mean, 20 years ago. He's passed away since, but yeah, some people would have found that offensive. So yeah, Madonna's not the only person that was famous that's done this kind of stuff. But let's finish up. Let's read a little bit more about God's tefillin. So he has us in his tefillin. Rav Aha, son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, it works out well with regards to the contents of one of the four compartments of God's phylacteries, but if he has head tefillin, as I showed you, there's four compartments. So what's in those? They all have to have, all of ours have praises of God. What portions and praise of Israel are written in the rest of the compartments of God's phylacteries? So that's fine for one, but what are the other things that God says? So Rav Ashi said to him, in those three compartments it is written, for who is a great nation to whom God is close, like the Lord our God, whenever we call upon him. From Devarim, from Deuteronomy. That's another thing that God remembers about us because it's in God's tefillin. And who is a great nation and who has righteous statutes and laws, like this entire Torah, which I set before you this day, which is the next verse, right? The next line of Deuteronomy. The next line says, happy are you, Israel, who is like you, a people saved by the Lord, the shield of your help, and that is the sword of your excellence, and your enemies shall dwindle away before you, and you shall tread upon their high places. That's also from Deuteronomy. Or has God attempted to go and take for himself a nation from the midst of another nation by trials, signs, and wonders? That's from Deuteronomy chapter 4. We actually read that at Passover. And to elevate you above all nations that he has made in praise, in name, and in glory, that you may be a holy people to the Lord he has spoken. Now, wait a second. You just gave us too many. There's only 4. You just gave us a whole bunch of them, right? You just gave us 1, 2. We only needed 3 more. You just gave us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that would be 6 compartments. So Rav Aha said, son of Rabbah, raises an objection. If all those verses are included in God's phylacteries of the head, there are too many compartments, as more than 4 verses of praise were listed. Rather, the portions in God's phylacteries must be arranged as follows. The verses for who is a great nation, for who is a great nation, are in one. So those 2 lines from Deuteronomy, they're next to each other, they're in one. They're similar. Happy are you, Israel, and who is like your people, Israel. They're also in one compartment because they're similar. And the line, or has God attempted it, is in one compartment, and to elevate you is in one compartment. So there are 6 lines, but there are 2 in 2 of them. That's how we get all of those lines. So God has all of these great things about us here. It's great.
How do they know?
How do they know? How do they know? I thought that God has tefillin is already amazing. And the fact that they know what's in God's tefillin is also amazing, because to some extent, of course, they're imagining what would be in God's tefillin. No, they don't say that. They're not saying, well, what would be in God's tefillin? They say, what is in God's tefillin? Because in their minds, God must have tefillin. That's not even a question. So there's a question of what's in it. They just opened it up and they gave an answer. So it shows you that they 100% believed that the things that they were doing were reflected back in heaven. We're not done yet, by the way. We're done with the page, by the way. This is the end, by the way, Jesse, of page 6. We flip over that page to the second side of the folio. In the phylacteries of the head, there are 4 separate compartments, and all the verses written together on one parchment in the phylactery of the arm, which only has 1 compartment. So all 6 of those verses are combined in the other one on the arm. So there are 6 on his head, but they're in 4 compartments, and there are 6 on his arm, are all written together, and they're in the 1 compartment. That is the end of it. So it didn't quite go on that page, but yeah, but that's the end of the discussion of that. And now we're going to finish now today with going back to what I told you they're going to get to, which is don't leave God hanging. You're going to see why. Additionally, Rav Ada said, that Rabbi Yitzhak said, one who is accustomed to go to synagogue and did not come one day, the Holy One, blessed be he, asks about him, as it were, to determine what happened to him. As it is stated, who among you fears the Lord? Who hears the voice of his servant? Though he walks in darkness and has no light, let him trust in the name of the Lord and rely upon his hand. Again, they're quoting Isaiah. In other words, God asks, who among you fears the Lord? It did not come to hear the voice of his servant and prayer leader who engages in the service of the Lord. Now, by the way, Christians interpret hears the voice of his servant to be Jesus. We interpret it to be whoever's serving God at that moment. The cantor, the rabbi, the Baal Koreh, who's ever leading services is God's servant. In other words, God asks, you're not going to hear the voice of my servant today? He went out before dawn and walks in darkness before prayer. If it is for a matter involving a mitzvah, that he went and absented himself, so essentially he didn't come. And then despite the darkness, there is light for him. The aura of his mitzvah will protect him. So he's not going to be in darkness if he was already doing a mitzvah, because the light of the mitzvah is going to be the light for him. The light that he would have had from being in synagogue, it's okay. It's covered in light. But if it was for an optional matter, some mundane purpose, right? That he went and absent himself from prayer in the synagogue, then even once the day begins, there is no light for him. Don't not show up. This gets to be a little scary. Because the understanding is once you have an obligation, once you've taken upon yourself the obligation to pray, and you don't do it, not going to be good. And by the way, that's not the end of this. We're going to finish this today, or we'll finish with this today. The verse continues, let him trust in the name of the Lord. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that God is so exacting with this person? The Gemara answers, so it gives the answer right here, because he should have relied on the name of the Lord and trusted that he would not incur any loss if he postponed dealing with mundane matters until after prayer in the synagogue, and that he did not rely on God. So if anybody's going to say, I had a really important thing to do at work that day, it was a matter of financial necessity that I did it, God does not like that answer. Well, that's definitely not the situation. We're going to get to that. We're talking about mundane matters. We're talking about things that are part of our daily lives that I just had to work out. I had to go to the gym. Now you could say, well, that's for my health, right? But not when it's prayer time. I had to take care of a business call. Nope. You need to roll.
Doing the mitzvah, like helping.
That is, that's okay. Yeah, and you get the light of the mitzvah that you would have gotten from being in synagogue. You get the light of that. On this same topic, told you it's not the end. I'm just going to tell you, it's a little tough, right? Rabbi Yochanan said, when the Holy One, blessed be he, enters the synagogue and does not find the minyan, right? He immediately becomes angry, as is stated. Why, when I came, was there no one? When I called, there was none to answer. Behold, with my rebuke, I dry up the sea and I make the rivers a wilderness, which, by the way, is from the same section of Isaiah. And we've read Isaiah now. Those of us who've been there on Tuesday, we've read Isaiah. And Isaiah does not hold back. Well, none of the prophets do. You know that. But he's saying, Isaiah is talking specifically about those people that don't show up. Concerning another aspect of the constancy of prayer, this is on the more positive side, Rabbi Helbo said that Rav Huna said, and remember, whenever we hear a rabbi quoting another rabbi, remember, we read this in Pirkei Avot, you've got to give credit to the people who told you this. Always give credit. You hear something, you give credit to the person who said it. Yeah.
So if we were to, because I haven't been paying attention to the numbers until
Yeah.
now. So if we would have come in and didn't have 10 people to do it online, would you say, listen, what I'm saying?
No. First of all, technically speaking, I follow the idea that God is with us if we have two people, right? If there's two people, we're okay. But that's what I follow.
But it's my understanding, if you don't have it, you can still pray, but there's certain prayers you can't say.
Well, that's the tradition, right? The tradition is you don't say certain prayers. You don't say the Baruch. You don't say any of the prayers that you don't say you don't say the Kaddish, technically. But the point is that I believe that the Talmud basically says if there's two people, it didn't say that. Is that the reform aspect? I think it's the aspect of, I think it's in the Talmud. I think the Talmud gives us a basis to say that while it's not the same, that, look, if there's two people in a discussion, you're not going to get the same depth of discussion. There's something missing if you don't have a minyan. There's no question that somebody, but is it magically 10 people? I don't know. But if 10 people are gathering together and they're all doing the same thing at the same time, which we're doing right now, it means that it's important enough for those people. Look, if you take on something important and other people are relying on you to be a part of that, to some extent, the mitzvah of being part of the feeling of obligation to some extent is to your community. Look, I can only tell you that if people are relying on you, which by the way is why I said I didn't feel terribly guilty because I don't go to that minyan normally in Arizona. I wouldn't have said, hey, I had to go. But I mean, by the way, I don't want to get into it, but I was 45 minutes away from that synagogue that morning. So it wasn't just like, but if I was normally there and I missed it for something else, then I would have felt really guilty, but I still feel a little guilty about it because technically speaking, could I have? Yeah, I would have had to totally rearrange where I was. It was literally like driving from Santa Clarita to the city and then having to drive back to Santa Clarita. But anyways, yeah.
Even what you said,
Yeah.
very famous verse. Again, truly I tell you that if two of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them.
Yes, that's an exact quote that Jesus just said that's in the Talmud. The rabbis who quote, the line that he just quoted is right what you just read. It's 100%. Yes, thanks, Glory, for putting that in. That is confirmation that by the time that the rabbis wrote this and by the time that Jesus quoted them, he knew exactly what the Pharisees said. That's why Jesus didn't really hate the Pharisees, because it informed his Judaism. It was his Judaism. The concept, the reason that they even call him a rabbi at all was because he was a Pharisee. Only the Pharisees called their people rabbi. The fact that he tells people not to call each other rabbi is more of, that's why I don't know that Jesus really said it. Because if Jesus really said that, he's basically saying there are no more rabbis after me, at least for us, which I don't know. I mean, I don't know that Jesus would have said that. I just don't. I mean, it seems kind of that there's no other teachers. There's no other teachers for our group. And the fact that Christians don't call each other, well, I'm not going to get into it, but early Christians did call each other. They did call their leaders in the Jewish Christians call each other rabbi. So they called him rabbi, but did they call each other rabbi afterwards? Yes, it does seem so. It's an Aramaic word, and they called themselves. There were other people in the early church that called themselves rabbis.
They would have to be if they spread out.
They didn't call themselves priests until much later. And I got to tell you, that was a Roman thing. That was not a Christian thing. I don't think Jesus ever would have imagined that his students and that his teachers who taught his words would be called priests. I'm just telling you, I think Jesus would have not been happy about that. But I'm not going to say that for sure. But based on what I've read about Jesus and what he says about the priests, he really doesn't like the priests. Yes, but then you'd have to say the people that come after you, who are your students, who you're teaching your word, are called priests. He would not like that probably. Would find that abhorrent. But yeah, because he really didn't like the priests, and they didn't like him. So feeling was mutual. But he really, by the way, if the Jews who were in Jerusalem who really didn't like him were the priests, they weren't the Pharisees, they were the priests who really didn't like him. And it says so in the Christian Bible. I don't know for sure that that's 100% exactly what happened, but that's what the Christian Bible says. That's why when you saw the Passion of the Christ, why those people that were talking about him with the Romans were priests. That's based on the Christian Bible. It is.
I find it interesting what he said was
A quote.
taken from.
Yes, it's 100%. The quote we read was from maybe 50 years before, 30 years before, 30 or 40 years before Jesus. So it's from the same time. It's from exactly the same time. So God is not happy. Let's just finish this last part up. The good thing is, So God's not happy. Concerning another aspect of it, Rav Achelbo said and Rav Kuna said, when one who sets a fixed time for his prayer, right? So he makes a minyan, he's part of a group. God, the God of Abraham assists him. Now that's a weird word because, not like different from our God, but Elohei Avraham, right? Like we say in the Amidah, Elohei Avraham, Ezru. That's all it says, assists him. Since prayer parallels the temple service as a sign of respect to set a fixed prayer for the sacred rite. The God of Abraham, that's less important than this last part. The God of Abraham assists him because this pious custom evokes Abraham's conduct. When you try to be at a minyan, try to make fixed time for prayer, when you have an obligation you put on yourself, that's what Abraham would have done. That's what Abraham did. And what happens? When he dies, those who eulogize the one who set a fixed time for his prayer, what do they say about him? Where is the humble one? Where is the pious one of the disciples of our father Abraham? Again, presumably one who sets a fixed place for prayer is a disciple of Abraham in every respect, including humility and piety. So when someone dies who goes to prayer all the time, they are remembered as being a part of that. And that is true to this day. When I see services, when I've been to a service, prayer, the eulogy, when I'm at the memorial service and people are eulogizing someone and they say, this person was at the minyan every day. I do. I still say that. Doesn't happen a lot, but people say it. The Gemara asks, from where do we derive that Abraham, our father, set a fixed time for his prayer? Well, who was he praying with? Right? Where was his minyan? There were no Jews. He's the first one. Gemara answers, as it is written, Abraham rose in the morning to the place where he stood before God, which is right before he almost sacrifices his son, or right around that time. The verb standing means nothing other than prayer, as it is stated, and Pinchas stood and prayed. So it doesn't say that he prayed, but it says that he stood. And from another place that we read in the Bible, in Psalms, that you stand and pray. And of course, what is the word for that? Amidah. Standing prayer. It's right there in quotes. The standing prayer. This is our prayer. This is the Amidah. How do we know Abraham did it? Because this is the standing prayer. We'll read one more paragraph. These are all great lines, but this is a good one. Rabbi Helbo said that Rav Kuna also, this is another one of his quotes. Rav Kuna said, one who leaves the synagogue should not take large strides because it creates the impression that he is eager to leave. Don't run out of synagogue. Don't go out, getting out of here. Abaye explained Rav Kuna's statement and said, this halakha was only said regard to those to leaving the synagogue. However, large strides seem particularly disrespectful. However, with regard to entering the synagogue, it is a mitzvah to run, and one is permitted to rush and take large strides when you're coming in. As it is said, let us know and eagerly strive to know the Lord. From the prophet Hosea, one who eagerly enters the synagogue displays his enthusiasm to follow the path of God. So you'll see, Jews running to synagogue, but you'll never see Jews running out of synagogue where you're not supposed to. And it is considered to be bad form to run out of shul and to say to somebody, I got to run. But people do that on a daily minyan. People will go, look, I got to go. I have a meeting, but you're not supposed to really eagerly run out. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to kind of leisurely leave the synagogue. You don't run away. Now on Friday nights, it's not a problem because most of us aren't going anywhere after. But when people have somewhere to go in the morning, let's face it, it could be, got to get out of there. But again, we don't fly out. I'm always flying in. I don't always fly out. Never fly out. I leisurely leave synagogue. I never rush out unless I'm really tired. Unless unless I'm not feeling good. No, but seriously, we don't rush out. Yeah. Yeah, it's not considered to be, again, because you're basically saying, look, I got to get at her. But yeah, look, we want to follow, we want to be on that path. And to be on that path, again, means that the path to come into synagogue is one where we're eager to come in and not eager to leave. So with that, we're finishing a little bit late. We're finishing 2 minutes late. We're not having class next Wednesday, and it's not because I'm out of town. It's because it's my daughter Rachel's birthday on the 5th, and she has announced to us that we have to take her to dinner. And since she is moving back to Boston a week after, we're trying to treasure up all the moments with her. So I apologize that we're not going to have class next Wednesday. We will the following Wednesday. But yeah, this Wednesday, Tuesday is virtual, but Wednesday I will be taking my daughter to her birthday dinner. She's 28 years old. 28 years old, 28. And she is going to be here, fortunately, for our dinner. She cannot stand our dog.
I remember she came up to our
Yes.
house and she couldn't stand
She
us.
still she doesn't even like our dog.
I wouldn't like it.
Where are you going to dinner?
We're going to one of her favorite restaurants in the city. We're taking her to Crossroads, which is it's a great vegan restaurant. It's owned by an Israeli chef named Paul Ronen. And it's funny because what she has gotten better at is eating food. Because when she was a little kid, she wouldn't eat anything either. It was tough. But no, she didn't like dogs and she didn't like to eat anything. But other than that, she was always a great kid. And she's doing great, but she is moving back to Boston. I told you, she threatened to become a Celtic fan, which I don't even want to think about it. I don't even want to think about it. She is getting nothing. He did, and we're sorry that he died. He was a interesting and he was a thoughtful man, thoughtful athlete who was very nice to people. Mike Halberstam obviously was friends with him. Mike posted a really nice tribute to him because he actually knew him. Halberstam. Did you see that? You didn't see it, yeah. Posted some pictures. All right, folks. In the meantime, be well, be good, and join us virtually or in person for Beatles Shabbat too. And our next Eat for TBA, if you can, which is June 18th.
Thank you.
At The Habit.
And then mention that.
The Habit, which has a great vegetarian Beyond Burger or Impossible Burger.
Have you seen the new commercials for Beyond Burger?
No.
They're all over.
Is it good?
Yeah.
Does it look good? All right.
Yeah.
I don't own stock anymore. Sorry.
You know?
I sold it. All right. Bye, everybody. We'll see you.
Goodbye, thank you.
Bye. We're moving into other fast food. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.